look, this is the enhanced version of the Jeff Rubin Show, and that means there are pictures. So when you hear this noise, take a look at whatever you're using to listen to the show, because there's something I want to show you to kind of demonstrate what we're talking about. I think we're ready. Let's start the show. Greetings! Welcome to the Jeff Rubin Show. I am Jeff Rubin. That is hopefully the last time I will ever use greetings to open the show. And today I am joined by Jon Finkel, Magic the Gathering champion. Thank you for joining us, Jon.
Thank you for having me.
And for those that are familiar with competitive Magic the Gathering, you already know who Jon Finkel is. But for those who maybe aren't, Jon is arguably the single greatest player to ever play the game. Is that fair to say?
Arguably.
It'd be an argument, but you would definitely be in that conversation.
I would be in the top two.
You have won countless tournaments. You were a first-round inductee into the Magic the Gathering Hall of Fame. You are on a card. You won a tournament for which the prize was getting to appear on a Magic the Gathering card. And it must be noted, you've also made a significant amount of money playing the game. I was looking for information about you online before this interview today, and I came across a quote on your Wikipedia page, because that's the level of research I do, from Magic the Gathering head designer Mark Rosewater. He said that you are, quote, the most naturally gifted player the game has ever seen. But I think the way to explain to people who don't know anything about Magic just how dominant you have been in the sport is to tell them that there is a thing online in the Magic the Gathering forums where people post Jon Finkel facts. And these are like Chuck Norris-style jokes, but they're about Magic the Gathering, and they're with you instead of Chuck Norris. So these are things like, Jon Finkel doesn't need counter spells, all the creatures his opponents summon are afraid to come into play, Jon Finkel pays 2 mana for spells cast through a Trinisphere.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I found that, they were pretty hilarious, but it was also kind of surreal.
So yeah, you're pretty good at this game, and for most people, being the world's most naturally gifted anything would probably be enough. But you have had several other careers. You have also played professional poker. You have counted cards in Blackjack. You currently manage a hedge fund. I mean, these are like Brad Pitt movie jobs. We have a lot to cover, so let's start at the beginning. How did you get into Magic the Gathering?
I mean, I was always a nerd growing up.
Yeah.
Right? I use the word nerd a lot. I'll probably be using it a lot here. Mm-hmm. I almost always mean it in a mostly positive way. You know, maybe like a little bit of laughing at, facts, but I always liked the sort of things that traditional nerds like. I read a lot of fantasy, I read a lot of science fiction. I mean, I read a lot in general because I wasn't doing things like sports. That's like untrue. I was tall, so I was on my JV volleyball team.
Oh, that's more than me. Like I could never have played. It would never even cross my mind that I could theoretically be playing a sport.
Yeah, well, I'm guessing, Rubin, you're also like one of us Jewish kids,
yeah, sure.
Right? So, I mean,
and we're from like 15 minutes away from each other.
We are. So, we tend to be good at things like math and science, but not so much at things like throwing a football.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I played, games like Dungeons and Dragons, right? Which maybe it's like the nerd football.
Mm-hmm.
And I was living in England at the time. My father, he was a computer programmer. And usually computer programmers don't get transferred overseas. But this was kind of at the beginning of the internet. And my dad was a very good computer programmer. And the company was headquartered in England. So they sent him over there to kind of work on integrating all of their systems. So obviously you can see that the nerdiness runs in the family.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was a math teacher. My sister's a PhD in computer science.
Right.
So, my English degree is actually kind of weak compared to all of that. But anyway, so I was living in England, and there was a game store in town. It was called Fun and Games. I lived in a town called Woking, which was mostly known because it was the graveyard for London. And I went to his game store. I was looking at maybe play some Dungeons and Dragons, see what was going on. And there were a bunch of kids there, playing this game. It looked kind of interesting to me. And it turned out it was Magic, and then I had something I was addicted to for the next 8 years.
Dungeons and Dragons seems fundamental, and I played more Magic than I've played Dungeons and Dragons, but they seem like completely different games, because Dungeons and Dragons, there's not really a winner per se. It's almost like role-playing and a group storytelling experience. whereas Magic is a game with rules and a big, a winner at the end of it.
Yeah, that's actually totally true. They are often played by, there's a lot of overlap in people who play them both.
I bet there is.
But I think a really good analogy, and this is something that people who are on the outside, they don't really get, is when I'm playing Magic, it's like someone's playing chess. Like, okay, there's like a wizard on the card or an elf or a dwarf, but when, Kasparov is like using his knight to take a bishop, he's not in his head thinking that, oh, there's a dude on a horse with a lance that's, stabbing a bishop and then the bishop is dead, right? He knows, oh, this is what this piece does. Magic, I would say, is kind of a lot more like a sport or a game like chess, and Dungeons and Dragons is more something like theater. I like theater. I also like sports. But one, it's like there's a winner, there's a loser. The whole point of it is to win, right? That there are rules that have to be followed. You're supposed to try to find within the rules, what's the best thing you can do, also based upon your talents and, whatever your opponent's trying to do. Whereas in theater, it's not like all of the actors are fighting against each other to try to get first place.
So I've played Magic. We've all probably had this experience where, especially in the 90s, when it was like a fad almost, and what is this game, and getting into it. But there must have been this turning point where you started to take it seriously, where you went from someone who's just, checking out the game at the local hobby store to being like, I can be competitive at this.
I moved back to the United States when I was 17. This was in 95. And, I was really into playing Magic. I went back to the same high school where I'd been in middle school before. I was always like a really nerdy kid back in the day. Like I was like that kid in middle school.
Mm-hmm.
So
Did
I
you
was
have friends nerdy? Were you like a kind of nerd with friends, or were you like legit like outcast?
I was like legit like outcast.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was like overweight. I didn't really get a lot of the social things that people were supposed to or trying to do. Later on in life, I think I learned to fake it a little bit. And also kind of the social things that one does in middle school and high school are probably not exactly the same as what one does in their 20s and then, now for me, my 30s. But yeah, so I wasn't super excited. The one kid that I was actually still kind of friends with from back before who went to my school, mostly because he lived across the street from me, was actually like kind of like a douchebag. So I ended up actually later on with a number of friends from my high school because my sister and I ended up being very close, and she was 2 years younger than me, and I made friends with a lot of her friends from school. But so I basically found my friends elsewhere. So, I went to some of the local game shops, where I played Magic, and I did pretty well against all the people there. Then they would have like local tournaments, some bigger tournaments. I would go to those, and, I would do pretty well. It's like I would play in these tournaments, and I would say, hey, I'm playing this tournament with everyone from kind of New York area, and I can definitely compete with all these people. And then in 1996, in February, they had their first professional tournament. At that time, I was 17, so I had to play in like the juniors, where you can only play for a scholarship. And
boring.
Yeah, but it was still really cool. And I remember too because I won my first round, but then my opponent had played a card, a Jester's Cap. I don't know how many people here play
I
Magic,
remember Jester's Cap.
but it lets you take 3 cards out of your opponent's deck, and I walk away from the table, and then there are 3 cards still sitting there, right? And they were, presumably the 3 cards that he had capped out my deck the second game. So at this point, it appeared that I'd won game 3 with an illegal deck. So I then got a game loss and ended up losing a match that I'd won. And if I had won it with missing cards, I'd actually won it where he had got to take 3 cards out of my deck beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand really paper. I was like livid. I was like, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna, I was very, very unhappy. And but actually a guy I'm very good friends with now. He's about 10 years older than me, but convinced me like I should keep playing all this stuff. I ended up doing well enough in the rest of the Swiss rounds. I made the top 8. I lost in the quarterfinals, but I'd won a couple $1,000s in scholarship money, and it just became clear to me that this was something that I could compete at with everybody else.
So it was just very gradual. You just went from local tournaments to state tournaments to the national tournaments to...
Yeah, this was kind of the same for everybody there. There are a lot of people now who are kind of on what they call the professional Magic circuit, like all the big tournaments. And almost all of them, when they started, there were already a lot of people up there, like a lot of people who were there, who were the best. mean, when I was playing, we didn't know who was the best. Like, I had no idea if there was some dude in, California or, Rio or in Tokyo or in, Germany who was really good. I just knew the people I played against.
How long had they been doing professional Magic tournaments when you started competing?
This was the very first one.
Okay, so this is the first one ever, not just your first
Yeah,
one.
the very first one ever, Pro Tour 1. You actually had to call in to qualify. And for the over 18 bracket, that actually got locked up really quickly. But for the under 18, that's why I was able to get in. Which it turned out later that probably the junior bracket for these first couple tournaments was actually tougher than the senior bracket. A lot of players who ended up being the top players later were still kind of too young at that point. But there were some of these names that were known. People, they'd had world championships before. They weren't kind of as seriously done as they were later. I mean, you look back at the deck that won, especially the 94 World Championships, and it's just kind of an embarrassment. It's like if somebody had cobbled together a high school baseball team and played them, in the World Series.
Mm-hmm. It would be crass of you to ask how much money you have made playing the game, so I Googled it before you got here, and according to the Wizards of the Coast website, you have made $300,000 playing professional Magic.
Yeah, I think that's roughly true. I actually suspect that you saw my Hall of Fame induction page where it had my lifetime winnings, which was in 2005. And after I was inducted to Hall of Fame, I got invites to basically any tournament I want to go to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd go to, one or two a year. A couple of years I didn't go to any. And I accidentally actually won a tournament in 2008, one of the Pro Tour in Kuala Lumpur.
When you when you read about you online, a lot of people mention how one of the things that makes you so great is you didn't play the game for a while, then you came back, won another tournament. That seems rare in Magic.
Yeah, well, I mean, people now play a lot more than people did back in the day. I mean, we played a lot, but people play also a lot more purpose in terms of, it's like every game they're playing is figuring out, what's the best thing to do in a given format. I mean, there are way more tournaments outside of the Pro Tour for people to play in.
There's also you can play online, and I guess like poker too. You just can play 1,000 times more games.
Yeah, well, I mean, exactly. I mean, there's Magic Online. There's also just a huge community of strategy articles. So
you're saying people like to talk about Magic the Gathering strategy on the internet?
They do. I mean, they were doing it in my time too, but it's just kind of very different. I mean, there are a lot of people now who are willing to devote their lives to their livelihoods to playing and being involved in Magic. Whereas at my time, I mean, there wasn't anybody who's 30 years old who'd spent the last 10 years kind of just playing Magic and writing about it. And I mean, first of all, it hadn't been around for that long. Second of all, if you were 22 years old and you were thinking, oh, should I finish up my degree in school and then get a job, or maybe I can just play this card game? There was no reason to really think that was a possibility.
Is that what you did? This is almost like my catchphrase.
Right.
Was this your full-time job?
I mean, for a period it was. I was in school, but I studied English, which is really
it's like half going to school. I majored in communications too.
Yeah, it's like half going to school. I mean, I was studying math for a while, and
that's a real thing.
It is a real thing. It was the sort of thing where, I would. And I took to Calc 4, and I swear to God, I feel like I learned almost nothing Calc 3 and Calc 4, but I was able to do well enough to, get Bs, because, the thresholds were so low.
So this is while you're playing Magic, you're studying English?
I was always a really bad student. I mean, my sister was a good student. If you didn't make me go to class, I didn't want to go. I hated doing busy work. I just could not do homework. It's questionable whether I'd get me to go to class.
But you still got through it despite the fact you had this apparently lucrative side gig playing Magic the Gathering. Was it ever tempting to just do that?
I mean, it was, and in a lot of ways, that is effectively what I did. In I guess it was 98, I want to say. Either 98 or 2000, I won $100,000 playing Magic. The other year, I won. The other one, I went very close to that. And I ended up kind of going from Magic. This is a progression that a lot of people end up doing. Well, okay, I'm playing Magic. I'm good at this game. It turns out that all of us kids that were good at Magic were also good at things like poker, right? This is also kind of the beginning of the poker boom on the internet, right? Where it was the golden era. I spent, I was never a good student, but I always liked to learn. And so I'm learning to play poker. I would be spending 50 hours a week, playing, but talking about it, discussing it, running through, in my head, keeping records. I mean, similar when I played Magic, I was really serious about before. It would be, hours and hours a week, way more than I would ever be spending on, a math class.
How much Magic the Gathering were you actually playing?
I mean, so at my peak, which was actually when I played the most, which was a little before my kind of best results. I mean, there's probably never a year where I played, 40 hours a week. There were probably some years I played around 30 hours a week.
That's really not that much. I'm a little surprised. Like, there's people that do things more and don't get as good at it. Like, I know people that have put more time than that into Skyrim over the past 2 weeks.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there were weeks where I'm sure there were weeks where I spent 60 hours, 70 hours, but there were also weeks where I spent less. But I mean, yeah, I mean, a lot of people say like, oh, John, he was, I think you said before, like the most naturally gifted, player to play the game. But that's also kind of a way of saying like he was also kind of lazy.
Yeah, I guess that is somewhat.
Because my results in the end were not quite as good as Kai's. I mean,
Kai is, if you're not the greatest player, it's Kai. It's one of the two of you.
Right, and
Kai, how do you say his last name? Bude?
Kai Bude, yeah. And, with Kuala Lumpur, I think my lifetime winnings are somewhere in like around 330 or 340. He's ahead of me by a little bit less than a Pro Tour win. So if I accidentally win another tournament, I will go into first place. I have like 12 top 8s, which are top 8 is when you did really good at this tournament. Mm-hmm. But I only won 3 of those. He has 9 top 8s, but he won 7 tournaments.
Wow.
It's like I've won the second most, and he's won over twice as many tournaments as I have.
When you're playing that much Magic the Gathering and you're practicing and you're learning the strategies, are you still enjoying the game, or does it become work?
It definitely can become work. So, kind of 2000, I guess, was, my best year. And then I had some pretty good years kind of after that. But even really starting in 2000, that was when I got, even starting in like 98 and 99 is when I was playing poker, and that started to eat into like a lot of my Magic time, right? And poker now was fun because it was new, it was interesting. There's like something you do there, there's something to prove. And in
you're
Magic,
still in school this whole time.
Yeah, I mean,
sort of.
Yeah, I'm in school. I mean, I got a degree. I graduated.
I mean, if you finished, that counts. Like,
I mean,
no one
I
asked
did.
You don't really need to put your GPA on the resume. It doesn't matter.
I've never given my resume anywhere.
Yeah,
but, I mean, I did enter as a sophomore, and take 6 years to graduate, 6.5 actually. So it was definitely not like an all-star.
It counts.
School. Yeah, exactly. It counts. That's what I like to say. But and then starting out, I started playing a lot of poker. Then in 2000, I got involved with this Blackjack team, which became like a huge time sink for me as well. But in some ways, these are all kind of like part of the same full-time career job. It's like I'm playing games, advantage games, right? Where I'm at this point, it's all cards. I mean, some of them people call gambling. I mean, I use that word all the time myself, but it's kind of like a semantic thing.
Mm-hmm. Advantage meaning that you, through skill and practice and studying, you have gained an advantage. You've managed to turn the odds in your favor.
Exactly. So I don't necessarily love gambling, but I do love placing bets where I'm going to win a little bit more than I'll lose.
Competing.
Competing, yes. Mm-hmm. But also, just the idea of, like, I don't want to bet $1,000 on a coin flip, but I'll bet $1,000 on a coin flip where I'm going to win 50.5% of the time, and you're going to win 49.5% of the time. And this is basically what I've spent my entire life doing in one venue or another. Just
whether it's with counting cards or with Heirloom Minotaurs.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've played Magic the Gathering back in the day, but I played it very casually. I never really got too into it, and I have no idea how the tournaments work. So what happens? You show up, you have one deck? Do you know what's in your opponent's decks? How does like the actual tournament formatted? So
they have 2 main types of tournament format. What they call limited, which is where you show up and you don't bring any cards with you, and you draft cards from packs, kind of like as if you were drafting like a fantasy baseball team. Mm-hmm. So there are 8 of you at a table. I open up my first pack. They already stamped them. They know where all the cards are to start, so that you can't go into your bag afterwards and add in some cards. And I look through my pack. I choose the card that I want the most for my deck. I take that. I pass the rest of the cards over to my left. I then take the rest of the cards from the guy from my right, and then I take my next pick.
So that puts the emphasis on deck building.
Yeah, well, it's it's a different set of skills. So it's a different kind of deck building. It's much more like on the fly thinking, understanding kind of format, like what you're going for. It also results in a lot of kind of situations that might not normally arise in games where both players had pre-built their decks.
Is the other type of tournament you bring the deck that your ideal deck that you've spent months going over meticulously, and you show up with your cards?
Exactly. They call those constructed formats. And there are a number of different formats within constructed. I mean, right now they have block constructed, which basically means the last year's worth of cards. Cards tend to be released in what they call blocks, which is one main set and then two subsets. And then they have standard, which is the standard constructed
Anything
format.
goes?
No. Actually, standard is the last 2 years worth of cards,
Yeah.
which is usually the last two blocks, and then also there's a base set that gets released about once a year. It used to not be every year. Sometimes they would release something else in there. Maybe now they've made it so it is every year. I know that they just did M12, but Magic started in '93, so it would have been M18.
And which is the most prestigious one? When you say I won the tournament, which format did you win?
So the Pro Tours it's not like one is more prestigious than the other. I mean, my general opinion was always that the limited formats were more skill testing than the constructed formats. I think this used to be true. Now it might be slightly less true because Wizards of the Coast have kind of moved away from the limited formats. They used to like put a lot of work into sets to make sure they're kind of balanced. Because people have such a limited card pool, there are some cards that are just super overpowered in those formats, and it kind of just like throws a huge monkey wrench in. Oh, I guess you opened up some of these super powerful cards and I didn't. Like that's awesome.
Right.
And they've done more work to try to make sure the constructed's being balanced, because back actually in '08, which was when I won that tournament Kuala Lumpur, is actually the last fully limited Pro Tour that they ever had. They then started to combine all the tournaments where there would be 10 rounds of constructed and 6 rounds of limited, instead of alternating between one format and the other. And I mean, I always did better at limited. Although interestingly enough, I actually looked at one point, and my lifetime win percentage in constructed is actually ever so slightly higher than it is in limited.
But you prefer the other format.
And Kai's is actually like switched for mine. It's kind of funny. But in terms of tournament performance, like I 12 top 8s. I made 8 of them in limited tournaments and 2 of them in constructed tournaments. And those were also, one of those was pretty early when I was playing a lot of constructed. And then the other 2 were in kind of mixed tournaments, or the World Championships, which also counts as a Pro Tour, as 2 days of constructed and 1 day of limited.
Do you know what other decks people are coming in with, or do you have to see it played live and react to it as you're playing?
You tend to have a very good idea of what decks are going to be played. There might be one deck or two decks that kind of surprise people.
Because there's kind of themes. Like I remember when I was playing, there were like discard decks, or there were creature decks, or is it that type of thing? And like, oh, this year these type of cards are good, so you're going to see a lot of direct damage decks.
There is that, but it's also just the fact that there's so many Magic tournaments being played so many places and people are obviously writing about it on the internet all the time, because the universe of people who play Magic and the universe of people who spend a lot of time on the internet, right? There's like a huge overlap here.
Yeah.
So everyone sees like, oh, look, there's this deck that won this tournament, semi-major tournament, in Chicago. Like, oh, looks pretty good. Like there'll probably be more of these. Or, oh, look at this weird deck that did well in Japan. Maybe that's good. And by the time there's, any like really major tournament, there are a ton of these other tournaments came before, and people are like, oh, so people are probably playing something like this or that, and they've kind of built versions of all of those and played them against each other and tried to figure out, given this kind of what they call meta game, what's the right call.
How much of the game is being able to construct a good deck versus being able to play that deck? Like, if I had your deck, could I win?
If you're like reasonably competent, then the answer is...
I'm not. I'm not reasonably competent.
Right. So, I mean, some of the constructed decks might get like a little bit too complicated. I'm not sure what's going on. But, I mean, it's, my lifetime win percentage in pro-level matches, I think, is something around like 62%. And there are very few other players who've been like over 60% lifetime. So there's a lot of kind of variance involved. It's not sort of a game where the best player wins at all the time. I would say that if we were going to a serious constructed tournament, you would do better with the deck that I built than I would do with the deck that you built. Because if you don't kind of understand what's going on in the format, if you're just like walking in, like, you
reading the card as I play it. Hold on, what does this one do?
Right, it's a lot harder to just kind of raw, like, with like, a day or two, let's say a day or two, to like build the deck from like a very large universe of cards, right? Whereas if you at least know the rules of Magic, I would be smart enough. I would give you like kind of like an aggressive deck that's just trying to like, win as fast as possible. A lot of it, you could definitely, average winning, a third of your matches. Yeah.
When I was looking, when I, again, was doing all this internet research, when I was stalking you online, one thing I saw was on YouTube, there are clips of you playing Magic the Gathering that were broadcast over ESPN.
And there it is. Jon Finkel wins the most amazing game of Magic I think I've ever seen. The key play in this game came when Maher played his Crumbling Sanctuary before attacking with his 1919 creature. What he didn't realize was that by doing so, he left Jon with 20 life and the ability to make 1919 creatures of his own. This very slight misplay cost Bob the game.
First question, when were they showing Magic the Gathering on ESPN?
They were at midnight, basically, is the answer.
Was that just a one-shot deal? Was it just that one tournament?
No, they actually showed a number of tournaments. They showed, I guess, Worlds 2000 is when I played Bob, who actually he was Player of the Year that year, and I ended up beating him in best 3 out of 5. It went all 5 games. Like, first game was like, very close, very tight. I mean, the whole match was, I won the first game, then I was down 2-1. Our decks were almost mirror images of each other.
I believe I read in your Reddit AMA, I really was stalking you, I believe you described that as the best game you ever played, or the most competitive series.
I've certainly described it as the most competitive series. I think people have called it like, oh, that was like the best game in like, the finals of like a pro tour. But it's like, the thing about Magic is your only standard is like, did I do everything right? I've had a lot of games where I've done everything right. I've had a lot of games where I didn't. I've had a lot of games that were, probably equally complicated where I did everything right. It's not like, oh my God, like that was so amazing. It's like, okay, I didn't do anything stupid. I mean, basically, I think when I was good at Magic, it was just that I did slightly fewer stupid things than other people did. Yeah.
And you can even do everything right and still lose.
Oh yeah, you can do everything right and still lose all the time.
And that's what you're saying about the coin flip too, where you gotta just keep.
Right. So yeah, exactly. My whole life has been looking for situations where, in the long run, I'm going to do a little bit better. I'm going to do it as good as I can. Like there's not a concept. I think people have kind of gone away from this sort of talking in Magic now, but you say like, oh, well, no, that was a really good play, but this was a slightly better play.
Were you aware obviously you were aware you were on ESPN, there were cameras everywhere. Did that add pressure to the match? Was that like a different type of match just because of the media coverage?
So they'd had a lot of media coverage up to that point of tournaments. You can find someone who's like really awkward and really young. You can find online like the 98 World or Pro Tour New York, which
you're
I actually
giving
won.
people, you're like, you can find something awkward. Here's what you should type.
Yeah,
I
had my hair like it was like awkwardly dyed red for no reason. Then it kind of faded to like a bad orange. Like it's kind of bringing out like my acne. I'm kind of I'm quite chubby. Then they had. There's even one of like a brief interview of me from like '97 Nationals.
But that was all on ESPN? What was that for?
I don't know if all of those were on ESPN. There were a number of tournaments on ESPN. I was on ESPN, I would say at least 4 or 5 times. And
but by that time you were used to it from all the other media coverage. It didn't matter that it was ESPN or.
Yeah, I don't think that was the first one that was on ESPN either. In fact, I'm pretty sure there have been already a few at that point. The 98, definitely the 98 World Championships, where I look slightly less awkward than I do in the 98 Pro Tour New York, but still very, very awkward, was definitely on ESPN too. That I lost in the semifinals that time.
Do you think Magic has a chance, obviously it hasn't been on ESPN in a while, do you think it has a chance of ever becoming a televised sports? Because video games are starting to make inroads there. There's Major League Gaming and that type of thing.
I think Magic has one real huge problem, which is the fact that it's really not very interesting if you don't know what's going on.
It was very difficult, and I like the game, and again, I know the rules, tapping and untapping, but it was extremely difficult to follow just because, there's 10,000 cards going on, and it's if you don't know everyone that's on the table, it's not like poker where you're just like looking for what card's going to be flipped over. You have to. There's a million things. It's hard to tell when something's going well. That was my take watching.
Right, and you actually played some Magic, right?
Yeah,
you actually
yeah.
kind of understand what it is.
Yeah, I know the basic flow of the game.
Somebody who's not a Magic player, if someone's not a poker player and they watch poker, I mean, they at least know some of the basic rules. The game is a very simple game to understand. Even if you watch like a video game, right? If I watch two people in like the Street Fighter World Championships, I can still tell, like, oh, like he's winning there too. I mean, I get the exact strategies that they're employing or why the one guy is better than the other one, but I can still see who's kicking the other guy's ass.
StarCraft is kind of probably even bigger than Major League Gaming, the thing that's really made inroads into televising games and esports or dork sports or whatever you want to call them. There are commentators in StarCraft who are famous for being commentators, and I've watched them. And I think what they do really well is explain what's going on and why it's important, because that's a game. Again, there's like 1,000 units, and you have to be really into it to know the pros and cons and how the flow of the game. But the good commentators can break that down for you and help you, even if you're not in, they give you, get you into the game.
Yeah, but they still have the advantage that somebody who doesn't really know the game at all can see, okay, this guy is attacking this guy, and oh look, his buildings are getting destroyed. Right. I mean, in Magic, someone who's watching has no idea if there might be a card that's completely irrelevant. And there might be like one thing that matters. It's basically they're looking at like pieces of cardboard with pictures written in Greek, right? And I mean, I think that watching Magic games is often very interesting. There's some great Magic commentators. I mean, Brian David Marshall has been doing it forever. Now he's paired with Rich Hagan. That back in the day there were people like Brian Weissman and Chris Pakula. Then Randy Bueller, but that's to me because I get what's going on.
Do you think you could ever do that? Could you ever be a commentator?
I mean, I could certainly be a commentator, just because at least I understand what's going on. I might not be always the best at filling in silences. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be like Joe Buck or whatever,
right?
Where I'm accidentally saying
that's a
stupid
classic,
things.
like the great, after a baseball player, once they're established as one of the greatest, a classic next career move, commentator.
Yeah, I mean, if they did all the Magic commentary out of a studio in New York, I might be very interested in it.
Yeah.
But if I was going to go to all these tournaments, I would probably instead be going to try to be playing in the tournaments because even though, like baseball, I'm kind of an old man at 33.
Mm-hmm. It's not the same with Magic.
I mean, it is a little, but if I put an effort, I could still be somewhat competitive. I mean, you
won a tournament in 2008.
I won a tournament in 2008. I actually went to two tournaments this year and they're actually very recently because one was in Philadelphia. So, I mean, it would have been really hard for me to say, no, I'm not going to go down to Philadelphia, especially since my family's from there, or my grandparents are. And, then they had the World Championships in San Francisco where my little sister lives now.
So Magic, not at all a young person's game necessarily. People can compete in it even as they get older.
Well, I mean, I didn't do that well at Worlds, but I did come in top 16 at Philadelphia. And they're like equally difficult tournaments.
Because video games, to keep comparing to video games for no good reason, very much a young man's game, like tennis almost, where like there's a point, because reaction time and reflexes are such a part of it that there's a certain point where once you get old enough, you just can't compete.
So I think that there's some ways when getting older, you do become a slightly worse Magic player. I did a lot of things when I was young with like my brain just like operating at absolute peak efficiency. And I can tell now that my brain is not quite the same machine it was then. I mean, it's not like a lot worse. It's not a lot off, but it's not, maybe it's like 95% of where it was or 90%. Now in life, I make better decisions. I have a lot more experience. I probably have a little bit less hubris, although I probably still have too much hubris. But in terms of like raw horsepower of like right now, how many things I'm paying attention to at once, how big of numbers I can multiply together in my head, it's not, you don't have to multiply numbers in your head in Magic, but
I see what you're saying.
It's definitely like a little bit worse. But there are other things that are involved in Magic, like building decks, learning draft formats. Unfortunately, a lot of these things also require a lot of time. which tends to be a little bit more of a premium when you get older. So if you're older, I mean, you can still do well at Magic, but it's, I'm never going to be quite as good as I was when I was, 21, 22.
I always thought the flaw of Magic as a game is that there is an incentive for Wizards of the Coast, who designs it, to always be making it more complex and to always be piling new rules on so they can always be selling new cards. Is it hard to keep up with that?
So, Mark Rosewater, who you mentioned earlier, he writes great articles. He actually wrote an article a couple years ago that he just tweeted about the other week. Maybe he wrote recently, I don't know. But it was a great article. No, he wrote recently about a change they made 3 years ago that actually talked about exactly this point. They noticed that they were having a hard time picking up new Magic players. And the reason why was because the game had gotten kind of more complex and such over time. And there are a number of different ways it can be complex. And what happened was the barrier to entry had just gotten kind of too big. Right? People had to learn too much before they even get involved. So they did a lot of work to, I don't think they've made the game any less interesting or any less complex in the interesting ways, but they did a lot with kind of cleaning up a lot of wording, not having unnecessarily complicated things they could kind of do in simpler ways. And they also worked with making the kind of more complicated cards, the rare cards, because the kind of people who are playing at the high level, they're going to have access to all the cards anyway. And the kind of people who are playing for fun, they're going to have much fewer of these very complicated cards, and they'll have more of the simpler cards, and they're not going to have to try to figure out what million things are going on. And since then, Magic's actually become done even better. So it seems like it was actually a really good change on their part. Magic
seems a lot of people, when I told them what this week's episode was going to be about, is Magic still popular? And I think Magic, as far as I can tell, it's so firmly, it's clearly not going anywhere. It seems like a lot of kids who grew up with Pokemon, Magic was a very natural next step.
Yeah, it totally was. They picked up, a lot from Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh. I've never played the games, but I often actually will.
It'd be great if you got into Pokemon now and just started dominating Pokemon tournaments.
Yeah, I can make 12-year-olds cry.
Win their scholarships.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to even use it, but I just want it to go to waste.
Just so you don't have it.
But yeah, no, Magic. Magic's kind of grown, pretty steadily. I think that a lot of people kind of think that Magic in the United States think that maybe it's not as big as it used to be, but that I think has a lot more to do with actually individual people's social circles.
That's true.
So when you're in a place like high school and to a lesser extent college, a lot of people in a lot of different groups. You interact with them, so some people play Magic, because everyone in your group. People who, in college maybe you see them in your I don't know in the dorm or in the cafeteria, and you're also kind of also meeting new people. Whereas as you get older, not only does your group of friends kind of shrink to people that maybe have a little bit more directly in common with, but you also meet far fewer new people, than you probably meet fewer new people between the ages of 22 and 30 than you did in the first week of college or the first week of high school.
Yeah, it's true. I guess that people who aren't following Magic, if you're in high school, you're oh, and especially in the 90s when it first started, you were and what is this weird thing the weird people are doing?
Yeah.
Whereas now the weird people are just on their they don't have to show it to them necessarily anymore.
Yeah, or it's just that you don't know, someone doesn't walk into a bar, you talk to them, maybe they're your friend's birthday party, they're one of their friends, and it's not like they're oh yeah, by the way, I play Magic.
Right.
But the person who's in your high school, you kind of probably end up just knowing so much about them.
Right.
Same thing in college, maybe you saw it in your dorm or something like that.
You won the Magic Invitational, where they invite the top 16 players to play, and the prize for winning is they design a card with you on it. Your card was Shadow Mage Infiltrator. Were you involved in the design process?
I was. I initially wanted to make another card, which would have been way too powerful.
What does Shadow Mage Infiltrator do?
So, Shadow Mage Infiltrator, he's, for all the Magic players out there, he's a creature. He costs a colorless mana, a blue mana, and a black mana. He's got 1 power and 3 toughness. And he has Fear, which is an ability that says he can only be blocked by black creatures or artifact creatures. Mm-hmm. If he damages your opponent, you get to draw a card.
Okay. And so that was all... So you submitted that idea after a previous one was rejected. Do you ever play with Shadow Mage Infiltrator, or is that tacky?
I don't know if it would be tacky, but he's not really very legal or even necessarily like that good. There's been a lot of power creep in Magic over the last few years.
That's another thing that gets back to, they have to keep selling new cards, so they have to maybe get a little better so you have to keep buying them.
Yeah, they definitely made a concerted effort to like increase the power of the cards. I'm actually not personally in love with it, but hey, I mean, they're the game designers, not me. So a lot of the old cards, they end up getting played in some like the formats where you play, the last 5 years of cards, or there's another one where it's I think like last like 9 years of cards. It means that you're mostly playing some number of recent cards and all the cards that were mistakes at one point in the past. Like by which I mean like a card that they didn't mean to be that powerful,
right.
But it turned out it was.
Particularly these championship cards got more and more powerful. Is there any like rivalry amongst you guys about which, who's got the best card with them on it?
It was pretty clear that who had the best card.
Who is it?
It's Bob Maher. Actually, he's the guy I beat in the 2000 Worlds. He won it, I think, in 01. I think he won it the year after me. Maybe it was 02. I don't know. But anyway, he his card Dark Confidant. It was just really good. Like he kind of like slipped it past Wizards the best. They discontinued the Invitational, and they'd actually never made a card for the last winter, and they just printed it. And with all the power creep, that card is also very good. It's called Snapcaster Mage. I don't know where that's going to end up, kind of compared to Bob. And then the only other person who had a card that was quite good, and so like a lot of tournament play in a lot of formats, was Chris Pikula had the card Meddling Mage, which is where he names a card and then that card can't be played. So I mean, he always did kind of have the trump because you could because his card costs 2 mana, so you could play his card on turn 2 and actually name my card. So his card could actually not just beat my card but stop it from ever existing.
How did you feel about the artwork? Because the art is like, it's like you in a wizard robe with a scepter.
Yeah, it's interesting. At first, I was like, oh, I'm not sure how much that looks like me, and then it like so clearly does. And I was just like, I wish I'd actually bought the I was offered the original art for it, but I was on 21 or 22 at the time. I was like, I don't really care about art. I was like, whatever, right? Like, no, I don't want to buy. I mean, I'm sure it was like some nominal price, and now I totally wish I had. I think actually some Japanese collector has it.
That's definitely a thing I've heard of, is people collecting Magic the Gathering art. I mean, there's probably people who love the game and play the game all the time and are primarily playing it just for the art. Because those have got to be the best fantasy artists in the... I think painting Magic the Gathering cards is probably the #1 job you can get if you're, a fantasy artist.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't even thought about it that much, but yeah, some, ridiculous percentage of the amount of the money that's there for fantasy art has to be for Magic.
It's that and book covers, I think, are the #1 and 2 outlets, and DeviantArt.
Yes, and DeviantArt. Yeah, and, they come out with... 1,000 new Magic cards a year, or maybe not 1,000, maybe 700. And they all have new art. Yeah.
When you were elected to the Magic the Gathering Hall of Fame, you said that Magic was one of the best experiences of your life, and that it, quote, prepared you for everything you have done since. And you've done a lot of interesting things since, so I want to talk about those. What came first, Blackjack?
Poker, actually.
Poker came first.
And then, actually, people I met at a poker club in New York, who actually 2 of them are now partners with me in the hedge fund.
We'll get to that too.
Were involved in this Blackjack team, and they were like, "Hey, we're going to Vegas. Maybe you should, practice, learn to count."
Way too much. Let's talk about poker first. Do you have as much fun playing poker as you do playing Magic the Gathering?
So I've played very little poker actually since about 05 or so. I think Magic is a more fun game. Poker, it's fun because you're competing. It's about money. And it can be complex in other ways. But as I got involved in doing other forms of gambling that were, I guess, more profitable than poker, my interest in poker kind of waned. Whereas my interest in Magic, I mean, it maybe waned a little bit, but then it came back. I still play Magic, a couple times a week.
What is your card collection like? I just imagine this I
actually basically don't have a card collection.
You don't have any cards?
No, at one point, I don't know, kind of towards early 2000s, maybe it was late 90s. I don't know, I got my backpack stolen, which had my old valuable cards, and then I would just borrow cards for tournaments mostly. My 2 best friends in Magic, Steven and Daniel OMS or O'Mahony Schwartz. They had like a huge collection, so like
I imagine you pros, like, I mean, when I was playing Magic when I was a kid, I had to, like, scrape together whatever I could, but I imagine whatever deck you want to put together, you probably have the access to do that.
Yeah, it was never really an issue of like, oh, I can't get these cards. And since then I never really put in a lot of effort to like build up a collection. It's just, I don't know, it just hasn't been that big of a deal for me.
Were you able to make money playing poker? Again, there's another website that tells me how much money you made doing that, and that's just like, tournaments as opposed to underground type poker. According to that website, your professional poker tour winnings were $70,000.
Right. So I guess that is what I made in tournaments. Although
not
those
as much.
sites are
Still, that's a lot of beta Black Lotuses, though.
Well, but those sites are they always try to make it look better than it is because they don't count how much money you spent to enter tournaments. Mm-hmm. I'm probably pretty close to break even on tournaments. I'm not sure exactly, but I have won a lot of money in live poker. The vast majority of the money I've made, or the money I play in poker, and the time I've spent poker was just playing cash games rather than tournaments.
If I have the same skill set you do, which I do not, and I'm a young boy and I'm like, I want to learn to play games and get good at games to make money doing them, would you recommend I take up poker or Magic?
There's definitely more money in poker. It's they don't give away a ton of money to play Magic. It's hard to make a consistent living, just playing Magic. Most of the players who do so now, they also do a lot of writing. A lot of someone's involved in like stores that are buying and selling cards. It's they have a lot of ways of supplementing their income in addition to like winnings from tournaments.
How did Magic prepare you, if it did, for poker?
So there's always like a kind of chicken and egg question, which is, was there really some about Magic that made all these people like good at games like poker, blackjack?
Because you were not the only Magic pro that turned to poker.
Or is it the same things that make somebody good at Magic that also makes them good at these other things? I think it's mixed. I think it's a little bit more. The. I won't say which one. I think it's more. I think that the biggest thing is this kind of deep emotional understanding that the right move is the right move regardless of the outcome. To be a good Magic player, you have to get away from results-based thinking, which is also very important for poker. And it's, in Magic, like a lot of times you can like do something and then you lose because of it, and you do something again, you lose because of it, but and you do another time and you lose because of it, but it's still the right play. You still have to do it again the very next time. And for some people that's hard. Maybe they even understand like intellectually, but emotionally it's a little bit rough. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think for most Magic players, it's just kind of like trivially true.
Is there anything, just the pressure of competing in tournaments, surely that just experience of, literally playing another card game in high stakes situations?
Yeah, I think that it certainly couldn't have hurt. I always did very well under pressure. I don't know how much of that was from practice, how much of it was something innate in me. But I always felt very comfortable in high pressure situations. I thought I did a little bit better. I certainly did not do any worse. So I think all of these things kind of probably factor in. Also the thing too is to be good at poker, you have to study it. You have to talk about it. You become like kind of obsessed with it. Like Magic players are probably somewhere on that autism spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
They get obsessed with stuff. They talk about it all the time. They want like what's best. What do you do here? What do you do here? Let me give you a situation. Say our friends. I had this, that. He had this and that. There was this thing I knew and this other thing. What do you think I should have done? Like I did this for this reason, that reason. Oh well, I can see that.
All these things are saying you could also be saying
right.
Poker.
Exactly. It could be poker. It could be Magic, and a lot of it's as much a way of thinking as it is maybe skills that are learned.
Were you ever playing poker and you were just like, if I could just summon a fucking Leviathan, if I could just get one out there?
Again, it's, I never really thought of a Leviathan as being an actual Leviathan other than, being like a little playing card. And of course, the Leviathan playing card isn't going to really do me much good when I'm playing Texas Hold'em.
But you could, tap it, maybe attack the other guy, maybe he doesn't know what's going on, you steal all the money. All right, I'll stop going down this track. So while you're playing poker, some of your poker friends say, hey, we should take up counting cards in Blackjack. I'm oversimplifying. What happened?
They were actually part of a team that was already doing it. It was a smaller team at that point, maybe 10, 15 people, mostly older, by which I mean, so my friends, specifically my partners Alex and Kirk. Alex is about 7 years older than me. Kirk, I think he's like, I don't know, he's probably 8 years older than me. And, so they'd been involved in this Blackjack team. They thought I'd be a good fit. at that point I was like the youngest person involved by like probably 4 or 5 years.
Is this pre or post the MIT book coming out?
So some players that had played on the MIT team did play with us.
Oh.
I mean, the MIT team kind of, in the end, I think it folded for a number of reasons. But one of the biggest things was there's a big split between the people who are playing and the people who are investing, and often their incentives will get a little bit like misaligned. Also, it's possible that maybe some like bad ill will could sometimes form because maybe you have like a bank where it's down a lot of money, and so the players are definitely not going to make any money from from these trips, right? But they're still kind of understand that like, oh, they're going to play for the length of the bank until it gets even if it's losing. And it's sort of thing where like, yeah, I mean, people, they always like mean very well, right? But maybe the person's a little bit less likely to like kind of like rearrange their life or miss something to go and work for somebody for a whole weekend when they already know they're not going to make any money. Or maybe they're exactly the same as they would have been. The person who's investing thinks that these other people, oh, well, they would be doing that if they were on money.
I think you are assuming I know way more about
I'm
blackjack
sorry.
card counting teams than I do. So there's what does a blackjack team do?
So there are a number of different things. I think there are two big reasons to play blackjack on a team. Mm-hmm. The first is that the variance is super high. Again, we were in effect, betting $5,000 on coin flips that we'd win like 50.75% of the time. There's a lot of randomness, and it turns out that it's really good. You want to flip the coin a lot of times. So if there are 10 of us, let's say, right, maybe I'm willing to bet $300 on these coin flips because if I bet more than that, maybe I'll go broke before I get to keep on flipping this awesome coin. But what works really well is if all 10 of us put together the money, and then when I flip the coin, I'll bet $3,000, but it's my 300 and everybody else is 300, and then each of the other people are also betting my money. So it's like if I have the most I'm willing to risk, I get 10 times as many people betting that, and I get into the long run much more quickly. And the second reason is because there are some types of play that really do better with multiple players. There's the classic, what they call the call-in play, which is, you have like 4 counters sitting at various tables in the casino. When the count gets hot, they, give a signal. The person comes in who's betting a bunch of money, and starts playing. They give him the count if he knows what he's doing, or if he's what they call a gorilla. They give him signals to tell him what to do. And that way, you can have people basically betting table minimum when the count is bad, and then somebody coming in only betting, thousands of dollars, but he only does that when the count is good because he's going from table to table only when the count is good.
Now, my understanding is this is not illegal, but the casinos have the right to stop you from doing it.
It's certainly not illegal. You're just using your brain.
Right.
It would be kind of like a weird thing if it was illegal. So, like, am I supposed to forget all of the cards I've just seen?
Right.
It's, yeah, but the casinos, they don't like it. And I can kind of understand. I mean, if the Bellagio, if they were forced to deal to me the same game they deal to everybody else and just sit there and take it, I mean, I would just sit there, at their double deck game, probably generating, I don't know. I mean, if they just would do whatever I want to, probably generate a couple grand an hour, right? Like, it's just insane. So, actually, it turns out, though, that they can kick you out in Vegas, but they cannot kick you out in Atlantic City. But what this means, actually, is that the games at Atlantic City are much worse because they have to do all these other things to make it so it's harder to beat their games because they know that they don't have that fallback where they can kick you out. And they can do other things. They can, the table you're at, they can, just start shuffling the deck all the time. They can, like, reduce the limits so that they can effectively kick you out.
And this happened to you?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
So it seems like more than poker and Magic, there's like an element of subterfuge here where you're not just playing the game, you also have to like fool real people into thinking you're someone you're not, or doing something under their nose you don't want them to know they're doing. That seems very different than some of the other stuff we've talked about.
Yeah, it was very different. It was a totally different skill set.
Especially for a nerd, that these are like very social skills.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, I read somewhere when I was reading card counting stuff about 7 traits that card counters have, and I don't remember exactly what they all were, but I was all 7 of them. It was like young, male, like casually, stylishly dressed, the whatever the body type is that's kind of like skinny. I think it's like ectomorph, or I don't know. But at that point, I was kind of skinny. Even when I was fat, I was like skinny fat. You know, and I don't know, there were like 3 other things, but I was all 7 of them, right? Jewish probably would have actually been a really good one, although I don't think it was there. So yeah, I mean, but I was able to, you know, do a pretty good job of getting down. That's called getting down is when they let you play. I mean, I had some things like I can totally just like I can have this conversation counting a table, right? So like I you know really seem like I'm not paying attention at all. You know, I do things like you know drink where they can see it. You know, I mean a lot of it gets poured down. You know, in the bathroom, but you know a lot of it gets you know rubbed into my goatee. And you know I was 22, I drank a lot anyway. I had an alcohol tolerance through the roof.
Just to fool them to thinking you're slightly more incompetent than you actually are.
Right, but you know there was still like a limit to how good I could be compared to some of the other people. You know, we had some people who were you know professional actors, you know, just very gregarious people who were great at this sort of stuff, and you know they may never have been quite as good as I was at some of the technical stuff. You know, especially there's some like more advanced games like you follow like cards through shuffles, but. You know, I would never be quite as good as they were at this other stuff. And really, I mean, some of them had like, it's like they could let casinos that have been kicked out, like basically let them do whatever they wanted to in there, right? It's really just kind of like impressive, some of them, to just like watch what they did.
Did you ever have any like Casino the movie type situation where it got real?
Not really. You know, sure, I got asked to leave a bunch. You know, one time I got taken to a couple times I got taken to back rooms. You know, only once was I ever even touched at all, and that was like the guy kind of put his hand on my back, but just in such a way to like let me know that like I was definitely be going to that back room and I wasn't going to be going someplace else. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, I never got assaulted. You know,
what goes on in the back room?
Usually they like, you know, want to like take a photograph of you, or you know, I don't know, like have you sign something just don't mean anything, you know, or just like kind of like yell at you.
It sounds absolutely terrifying.
You know,
first back room I'm out of the card counting game.
Here's the thing though is, so when they would like kick you out of a casino, like they were always like more nervous and more terrified than we were. Maybe not the first time, right? But like I've you know been kicked out of casinos dozens, if not hundreds of times, right? Most of these people have like, you know, never kicked somebody out ever, you know, or they've done it a couple times.
You've been kicked out of casinos hundreds of times?
I would suspect that it's certainly over 100.
How much blackjack card counting were you doing?
A lot. You know, I mean, this is probably the reason why I wasn't doing as much Magic. You know, I mean...
distractions, man, I'll tell you.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, I played a lot in like 2001, 02. You know, some into 03. It was, yeah, you know, I mean, I've been all over, you know, random Indian casinos, you know, Washington State, the Midwest.
Was this more profitable than Magic and poker? Sorry to always keep bringing it back.
Sure, no.
Also very Jewish.
So yeah, my the year I made the most of blackjack, you know, I made low 6 figures, a little bit more than most I ever made playing Magic. You know, it was also somewhat part time. What happened though was really in like 02 and 03 it was like the real like internet poker, just like it's like the golden era, and it became very true that anybody who can make a living playing blackjack could make an equally good living playing poker online, you know, sitting at home in their underwear and not have to like fly to like Vegas and then, you know, Atlantic City and then to like Biloxi, then maybe go to like New Orleans, and then maybe, hey, I'll go to some of these casinos in like, you know, Iowa and the, you know, in the Midwest, and then I'll go to like, you know, the California Indian casinos and then back to Vegas.
Yeah. Was blackjack ever a fun game for you? Because, you know, it seems like obviously when you're in Vegas and you're gambling, you're playing blackjack, that's fun. Right. But it seems like as a game, just simpler and
it's like an awful game. It's, you know, I mean, it's kind of fun. Like you're counting, like some of the tracking stuff. You know, you're betting large amounts of money. Gambling is fun. There's a reason why people like to gamble, right? You get to see, you know, you tend to win more than you lose. That's also fun. You know, but there's also like, I mean, casinos are kind of depressing places, you know, especially casinos in the middle of nowhere. Like, you ever been to like a casino in like Joliet, like, you know, Indiana?
No, but the glitzy casinos in Vegas are depressing. So
yeah, exactly.
Like, the further away you get.
You know, I mean, I used to call Atlantic City like a pit of human misery.
Yeah.
You know, and it's probably better than the Indian casinos in the middle of nowhere, right? Like, you go there, it's like 2 p.m. on like a weekday. It's like you and like all seniors, 70% of them are overweight, and they're just gambling their social security. Yeah, they have what we call the invisible seatbelt. You know, that they just can't get up, and you're just like, man, like, you know, the dealers often like places like, you know, it's like this is the best job that they can have, and it's fine. They're very happy to have it, but it's like, you know, I'm talking to some of them, you know, they have, you know,
I always assumed dealer was a good job. I guess it's in Vegas and like if you're at the Bellagio dealing, that's kind of glitzy and prestigious, but maybe not in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, maybe more of it's just to like I hadn't end up talking to people who like live in like the middle of nowhere, kind of like towns where they have like no real prospects, like that. There's not much going on, and I feel sorry when who's listening here. I don't want to like I'm not trying to like talk down about any place in particular. I mean, I think New York was recently voted like the least happy state in the United States. So, but it's just like you're just like talking with them because you're there for so long about their lives, and it's also kind of weird because like 90% of what you're saying is about your life is kind of false, like based upon some like some falsehood because I can't say oh well what would I do? Well, I'm a professional gambler. I'm going to school at Rutgers. But in my spare time I drive around these places. No, it's like I have to have a whole backstory. Like, why do I have $50,000 of cash in me in the middle of nowhere in Iowa?
And you have, while you're lying and having that conversation, you also have to keep your focus on the cards, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean that's actually becomes like kind of the easy part. Like it's not like a very difficult game. I mean, you have to like practice and learn, and it's like it sounds like tedious, but it's just like adding and subtracting one in your head a lot. And if you practice it a lot, you just kind of don't forget.
Whenever I hear about like a casino angle, like something like this, I always think, wouldn't it be easier to just learn plumbing for a year and take up plumbing? It seems like easier and just as profitable.
I mean, if you factor in like all of the time that you're not in the casino, I mean, maybe, but still no. I mean, I had, it's like I was playing like Magic in 2000. I was playing like Blackjack. I made, I was in college at this point too. I made like, I don't know, like 100 and some grand for each of them. I made, some money playing poker. It was still like overall like maybe between the three of them it was kind of like a full-time job. It's and it was fun. I get to hang out with interesting people. I got to do interesting new things. It was a lot of fun.
Getting back to this theme of Magic prepared you for everything you've done since. Yeah. How did Magic prepare you for the card counting?
I mean, again, it's just your brain. It's like a well-oiled machine, right? It's like I was working my brain out all the time. The same sort of like paying attention, being very alert to what's going on, keeping track of a million things in my head. It's just kind of like, mental, gymnastics.
And now your current job, probably, I don't want to say the most legit one, but maybe the one you could probably the most easily explain to your grandparents. You are a hedge fund manager. What is a hedge fund? Is that that's like a 3/3 green monster trample, right?
Yeah, no, exactly.
What is a hedge fund?
So the term hedge fund actually comes originally from hedged fund. So hedging in finance means kind of covering your bets. So a classic example is it's actually not sort of stuff we do, but would be that you think, Walmart's a really good company, right? Like you think that, man, like they're trading at $50, but they should be worth like $55. But when you buy Walmart, you have to worry about a lot of things. Like, you don't have to worry about just how good company Walmart is, but I don't know, like how well is the entire economy doing? Our oil price is high because Walmart pays lots of money in shipping costs. The retail space is maybe our banks doing well, but not the retail space. So you have all of these things to worry about, and of like the big pie, maybe only 25% of the move in Walmart stock is actually because of whether Walmart's a particularly well run or more valuable company than stock price. So you might say, well, hey, all right, Walmart looks pretty good, and Target over here doesn't really look that great. And Target and Walmart are in a lot of ways very similar. So you might actually buy the Walmart stock, and then you're going to sell the same amount of Target stock. And now you've kind of managed to eliminate a lot of these other risks. And now you just have a bet on like, is Walmart a better run company than Target is?
So that's what you're doing now?
That's actually not what we're doing, but that's where hedging comes in.
Okay.
And so it was when company like funds started to use these practices of taking a bet on one side and then taking a bet they would go against that bet, and then they would be hedged. If it went up, if the market went down, they still have their bet, which is just that Walmart's a better run company than the other companies that are like it. Over time, it became basically though the term for just any fund that effectively does what it wants to with a bunch of money. Usually that they have mandates, like this is what we're trying to do, but they're also not regulated or very little regulation because of the fact that they can only take investments from people of high net worth who they basically say know what they're getting into. And so now it's kind of like a term for, a broadly unregulated fund that that takes in certain amounts of capital, but only from people of high net worth, and then they do what they want to do with it, and at the end of the year they keep a little bit of their winnings, and then they give the rest back to their investors. I mean, there's still regulations. Like I can't actually like talk right now about like if our fund is doing really well. I can't do anything that makes it look like I'm doing like a marketing pitch for our fund, because you're not allowed to advertise it to random people. You have to, go specifically to the sorts of people who are going to be interested in investing in these sorts of funds.
And how did you get involved in this? This seems like, I mean, as much as you can trace a pattern through the other things you do, this seems so different.
It's very similar. Four of us were professional gamblers at one point, including me and two of the other partners were on the Blackjack team. I met him at the poker club I used to come to in New York City. We're mostly a quantitative fund. So what we do is we kind of look for like algorithms that, in some instances say, okay, this stock we think is a couple pennies overvalued compared to this other one. It's very much about like looking for edge in places, like looking for, okay, like where something's being slightly mispriced, where I have a little bit better than 50%, where I can find this coin flip of 50.5% and I can bet money on it.
Kind of like looking for the exploits for the cards that they didn't realize were overpowered yet.
Exactly, right? In fact, I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's sort of thing where if you come with like a great way to value something, right, in a hedge fund, and then like the whole world knows about it too, then all of a sudden it's pointless. Like, who cares? Everybody knows that. Now we have to find something else. And it's the same thing in Magic, right? Like if you like build like the best deck of all time, like you have the absolute best deck, right, for a format, and then you play in a tournament and you dominate it, right? And this happens a lot actually. Well, then everybody knows that, okay, that's the best deck. Okay, but what's true in Magic is that you can build a deck that will beat the best deck. It might not beat that much else, right? So then also in the format, the best deck is no longer the best deck, right? So it's all about kind of being a step ahead and figuring out what the rest of the world has undervalued and what the rest of the world is overvalued.
Were you genuinely interested in this, and you came to this naturally, or was this a conscious effort to get into something, and I hate to use the word, but like more legitimate, something more you can more easily explain to your grandparents?
No, it was more that I was interested in it. I mean, one thing I haven't talked about a ton here, but I did a lot of gambling on sports, which actually was the most lucrative.
Really?
Yeah, and
that's how do you get an advantage? It seems like your thing is finding that edge. How do you get an advantage in something like sports?
It's a lot same like mathematical models, stuff like that.
So it's researching the players and the teams and figuring out the line is not fairly set for
right.
this match.
So we come up with like we think the line is, if it's wrong, then hey, we'll place a bet. We hope to win a little more than we lose. The hedge fund is actually it's more of like a we start kind of small. It's sort of thing that's more of like a long-term thing. Like, okay, this might grow into being something like really good. But it's also cool because you get to, I get to like approach a lot of problems that I might not have had an opportunity to approach, before. Like, it's like I get to like think about things in new ways. Like, okay, like how do I think that other people are valuing these things? How do I think I should value these things? Can I think of a new way to look at this that maybe the rest of the world hasn't done before?
Now that you're doing this, now that you're managing this hedge fund, do you still go back and play Magic?
Yeah, I do play Magic. So I went to Philadelphia and San Francisco. One was at the beginning of September was Philadelphia, or end of August. I think it was the end. Maybe it was the beginning of August. I think it was the end of August. And then San Francisco was just a couple weeks ago. Before that, it had been like a year and a half since I went to a major tournament.
And you're going through. You did this for a few years, and you did that for a few years. Is the hedge fund? Is this? You said it's a long-term thing.
Yeah.
You think you're settled here for a while now?
I mean, I hope so. We've. I mean, I feel good about it. We've managed to, I think do pretty well. I'm confident we'll do well in the future.
Were you able? You were talking about how when you get into blackjack, and I imagine when you open up a hedge fund, you need investors. Were you able, with your winnings from all these games, do you still need investors?
Oh yeah, I mean, in the long run, I think actually our success will be more determined by how good a job we do at getting outside investors rather than how good a job we do at making money. Because we're definitely better, I think, the second than we are at the first. But we've managed to do a pretty good job of growing. We started out very small. We're now very small in hedge fund terms, but about 5 times as big as when we started 5 years ago. We've
talked a lot now about all the games you've played, all these edges you've tried to gain. Can we talk? I don't even know. Can we talk about the Gizmodo incident a little?
Sure.
That's something you're cool to. I don't.
No problem.
Well, it's weird because these other things you entered a Magic the Gathering tournament. You worked very hard at becoming the best at this thing and that thing. But this is something that was kind of thrust upon you.
Yeah, I was.
Can you describe what happened from your point of view?
I mean, it's just funny in that, like, I've gone out with a lot of girls in my life.
Well, tell the story for those that don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, I was gonna get that. I was saying I've been with a lot of people. Like, I've been on a lot of dates that were like really like interesting or out there, or dates with girls that probably have legitimate reasons, to be like, oh, that guy was like weird or like a loser, or he was an asshole. I mean, I don't think like that many, but this was like the most like nondescript like date I've like ever been on. It was like I went on a date with this girl. It was just kind of like blah on both of our cases. And
you guys had met on.
We met on OkCupid.
OkCupid.
And then after we go out. Like I don't know. She sends like a text next day. She looked me up or something. I actually, it was funny. I actually replied. This is kind of pressure. I said, with great power comes great responsibility. I was just kind of joking, and then she replied. And then a couple days later, I was home. Her office is like 3 blocks from my place. I was kind of bored, and she was like a nice girl. She was like sweet. I thought she was smart. I was like, all right, this is really sort of girl I should like. Like let's whatever. I'll see if she's around for like grab ID. And I text her. I'm like, hey, I'm around. You around in half an hour? Grab ID. She's like, sure. And we went out again, and it was still like, kind of bored. We were both bored. I was bored. She was bored. For whatever reason, we didn't have any chemistry. I was like, okay. And then, we walk away, and I'm like, okay, sure. I probably would literally have forgotten about her, and she would have forgotten about me at this point. Except for that 2 weeks later, I get home from work, and I have like, 100 emails. And apparently she posted about our date on the internet. And it was funny in that it didn't really say anything like negative about me, except for he played Magic, and I can't believe he didn't mentions his profile, make a big deal about it.
I think it accused you of hiding that of like not being completely upfront that you played Magic. Like, it's the sort of thing you should have to tell someone on a first. It was sort of the tone anyway.
Well, I actually did mention on first date because I don't know how it. I'm not really very shy about talking about it. I mean, I think it's like one of the awesomest things I've ever done.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing.
I don't really mention him in my online dating profile, mostly because there's no real gracious way of saying, oh, by the way, 10 years ago, I was this world champion at this game. Now, you're only 50% to have heard of it, and if you've heard of it, you're only like 20% to think it's impressive. Yeah. So now we have,
we keep flipping that
I'm
coin.
going to definitely seem like I'm bragging about something that was, 10 years ago. I feel like a lot of people are like, okay, like, kind of like, so what? And I just feel like you're going to come across like I'm being kind of like, arrogant, right? Like, oh, look, by the way, everyone, like, look at me. I was like the, I led our high school to like the track championship, 10 years ago. Like, it's, I mean, I think it's pretty cool. I'm impressed with it, but, I don't know how you just drop that like matter of fact, like without seeming like you're kind of a braggart.
But the tone of her post was certainly very negative. It was definitely why would, like, who, this is ridiculous, and just insulted that you hadn't told her.
Yeah.
But then the internet. Then something interesting happened where like she almost made you a martyr, and like the internet kind of came to your defense. Whether I don't know whether you wanted to or not.
I mean, by the time I even knew it was up there, already the internet had started to go nuts. I mean, it's funny. I guess again, like to all the kids who played Magic, they remembered me, and I said there's a huge overlap between the people who play Magic and people who spend a lot of time on the internet. Although what was actually interesting was that I felt like the people who were most like vociferous were actually girls.
Oh,
well, I think that probably if you read like comments and stuff like that, they're probably more guy comments. But if you like went to see who wrote like 2-page articles and blog posts about it, it was like overwhelmingly girls.
Why do you think that is?
I feel like it was because it really touched on something that probably a lot of them didn't like. I guess they viewed me as, little do they know, but as a kind of like a nice guy, seemed like a decent kind of guy. And like, and she kind of did all of the really like kind of like things that maybe a lot of people would say like, oh, like these are ways in which girls are shallow or kind of judgmental. And, I mean, it's also, I think, kind of true that I feel like girls are just better at being kind of like, seeing other girls and like being cruel to them and giving them a hard time than like guys like, really can be.
Like middle school guys will like beat each other up, but middle school girls will destroy each other.
Yeah, they'll tease each other until somebody like gets an
they will like
disorder.
give you a complex.
Yeah, exactly. It's but yeah, I think that it was just a lot of these girls out there were like, this guy seems like a kind of like nice, cool, like nerdy guy, the sort of person to like we like to be with. And then we have this girl who thinks she's so awesome, like giving like all of us girls like a bad name. It was it's I mean you can read through some of them yourself. It was.
So I saw that someone had sent it to me. It was big news on the internet the day that happened.
Yeah.
And someone had sent it to me, and I had tweeted about it because I was familiar with your work,
right.
And I was like, this guy's not just like I thought your career is very impressive, but I realized, and I linked to it, I was like, this is bullshit. But afterwards, like 10 minutes later, I was full of regret, and I felt like I had been duped because that's what she I felt like it was trolling. Like that was the point of that article I felt like she knew what she was doing, and she wanted to make the internet mad at her. And I'm sure that's one of Gawker, which runs Gizmodo, that must be one of their top articles of the year.
Yeah, it was funny. I think I had like over 1 million hits, and there were a bunch of other, there's like an article next to like, I don't know, some like Bill O'Reilly thing, like, I don't know, like a mistress or I don't know, so some sex abuse, or not sex abuse, sex harassment, I don't know, something, those which have been normal big, and it had like 25,000 hits. It had, like a 40th of the number of hits. I mean, I don't think that anyone could be that prescient. I don't think that I think that if people could actually figure out like which trolling thing is going to get, 1 million hits in a site where it averages, I don't know, like 10,000, 20,000, it's, I don't think that person really necessarily exists. And I certainly don't think that the best way to get 1 million hits trolling is to, talk about some guy who happened to be best at this card game that really only a small percentage of the population knows about.
Yeah, I guess it wasn't that, because it didn't seem like she was down on you specifically as much as she was just down on like nerds and like just like that anyone would do this. But I think what made it so egregious, I think if she hadn't used your name, it wouldn't have been as bad. But the fact that she had used your name and like called you out specifically seemed particularly bitchy because you didn't ask for this.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not saying you have to call her a bitch.
No. I think it's kind of.
I'm sure she's a nice person, but I thought that was somewhat bitch.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's kind of like outside the kind of general understanding of what, you go out, you meet somebody. I mean, firstly, you shouldn't really necessarily trash like random private people on the internet anyway. But, you go out with somebody and you're just going to like call them out by like name, like on the internet. Like, that's my general understanding. Like, if I go on a date with somebody, I don't have to worry about like, I didn't even think about it. I'm going to read about it tomorrow, right? And it's not even like, look, also like I wasn't an asshole. I mean,
yeah.
It's not like I was like, like, oh, I want this guy and he like slipped me a roofie and then tried to like, caveman me back to, his place over his shoulder. Like, it was like, I want this guy. He seemed like a normal guy, but then turned out I played Magic. What a loser. On the other hand, the internet was probably a little bit harsher than they needed to be with their, in their defense. I mean, I appreciate it and all, but, the kind of like the 10,000th comment, that's, a meme generation of like a ugly picture of her.
I saw that, yeah.
It's like, all right, like you, being that 10,000th guy, you're not really adding anything. You're I don't know. Yeah.
You didn't seem particularly bothered by it anyway. Is this something Magic also helped you prepared for?
I mean, I don't know. I'm 33 now. Like, in the grand scheme of bad things happening to me in life, like this isn't really that bad. It's also probably easier when, the whole internet was like, this guy seems pretty cool. What's going on with that? So, I mean, yeah, it just, all right. I mean, I felt, especially at first I was like a little bit, like, I guess I said violated. That's probably a good word. You feel like a little bit like icky, like, as if like someone like said like, oh, look, we found some of your diary. We're going to throw it online. But then, like I said, it wasn't really that bad, and, in the end, it worked out a lot worse for her than for me, I think.
That's definitely true. This was probably something like 6 months ago. Have you ever spoken to her since?
I have not. I haven't talked to her since the
That's
time
crazy.
it went out, like 2 weeks before the article.
It seems like someone would just try to put the two of you in contact. Are there any women playing professional Magic?
There are a few now. When I was playing, there were basically none. There are a couple now. I know that there's one girl who I think made the top 50 of the Pro Tour in Japan. Don't know her name. And there's this other girl and her name is like Melissa Del Toro, who I know has done well some Grand Prix. Maybe she's done some Pro Tours as well. I think she's the woman with the most like lifetime pro points.
I would say the saddest thing that came out of this Gizmodo incident is to get back to the true theme of this episode, which is me stalking you online. When you look for information about you now, there is nothing about any of your remarkable achievements in Magic or poker or the hedge fund. It's exclusively all about this Gizmodo thing because it blew up so much.
I used to say, well, it's still probably true that I'll never be more famous for anything I do in the rest of my life than this game that I was, the best in the world at when I was 20 years old. But, maybe I'll be a little bit more famous for a date I went on when I was 33 years old, which is not something I ever would have guessed.
Thank you so much for spending all the time. But one thing I want to talk about before you go, you're starting a charity.
Yeah, we're starting a charity. Hopefully, we should have our paperwork done by the end of this year. It's kind of like a long process. It's called Gamers Helping Gamers. And the point is that there are a lot of like very bright people in the gaming community, playing Magic. In order to be good at it, you have to think outside the box. You have to. I hate that term, but whatever. You have to be a very bright person. You have to your brain has to work in interesting ways. You have to be very rational. And a lot of these people don't necessarily come from, the wealthiest backgrounds. It's and also a lot of them, maybe don't even really realize the places where their skills can be applied outside of just Magic. So we hoped have a charity where we can donate some scholarships to kids who are in the gaming community, who are bright kids who might not have chances they might not have otherwise, and also to maybe help steer some of them towards the sort of places where they can find value in their jobs. You can argue back and forth about whether traders are how socially valuable they are. But, it's certainly a good career for someone in Magic, like Susquehanna International Group. They're the largest option trading firm in the world, and they have, a half dozen former Magic players working there.
That's cool.
And just having, connections to these sorts of people can also be very valuable for kids. I mean, in addition to, of course, our primary, goal, which is to, help, needy kids go to college.
You said you're getting the paperwork together. Is there anything people can do to support it now as they're hearing us speak these words?
I think not. We already have our state stuff in line, but in order to make it a tax-exempt fund, we need to finish with the paperwork stuff. And I think that it's already turned in. It's just like a process in terms of from when you turn the paper, how long it takes to get it back. I actually, luckily my friend Tim McKenna, whose idea it was to start it, and who works much more of a standard white-collar job, he's an economist, he's been kind of dealing with that aspect, whereas, I've gotten to talk about it and get some of the credit while he does the kind of annoying work.
Well, will you let me know when it's up so we can tell people? Because it sounds
Please.
like a fantastic charity. I think people that listen to the show, it sounds right up their alley.
Yeah, no, that would be great.
Basically, my mom would want. My mom is the only person she would love to help you out a little.
Oh, that would be great.
Gamers Helping Gamers. Anything else we can plug?
No, I think that's it.
I don't think we can plug the hedge fund legally.
No, you can't. I may have said slightly too much. I try, but it's good.
Cool. Well, John, thank you. It's such a pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much for being on the show.
I don't know. Thanks for having me.
I don't know exactly what happened, but you and I are currently in the middle of a Jeff Rubin Show trilogy about new games that people are competing at. Last week we visited the International Quidditch World Cup. This week we talked about Magic the Gathering. Next week on the show we are going to have Adam Cornelius, who directed The Ecstasy of Order, a feature-length documentary about competitive Tetris. So we're going to be talking about the competitive Tetris scene. Very interesting stuff. I'll let you know when that episode's up, and I'll let you know when John's charity is up and running so you can donate to that. If you follow me at Twitter, at Jeff... You like how I put the charity in there? You should follow me on Twitter for charity. On Twitter, it's at Jeff Rubin Show. On Tumblr, it's jeffrubin.com. There's a Facebook fan page, and of course, youtube.com/JeffRubin. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next week. Bye.